It was a crisp autumn morning when Emma and Jake Thompson first laid eyes on their dream home. Nestled at the end of a quiet, tree-lined street in the small town of Willow Creek, the house was everything they had ever wanted. The wraparound porch, the sprawling backyard, and the serene surroundings promised a peaceful life away from the chaos of the city. For Emma, who was 6 months pregnant with their first child, it was the perfect place to start their family. The house had been on the market for months, and the Thompsons couldn't believe their luck when they finally closed the deal in October 2024. The property was secluded with a long, private driveway that led to a paved road. It was the kind of place where they could imagine their children playing in the yard, riding bikes, and growing up surrounded by nature. But as they soon discovered, their dream home came with a catch. The first sign of trouble came just a few weeks after they moved in. Emma was sitting on the porch, enjoying a cup of tea, when she noticed a car driving up their driveway. At first, she thought it was a delivery driver or someone who had taken a wrong turn. But when the same car returned the next day, and the day after that, she began to feel uneasy. One afternoon, Emma decided to confront the driver. She walked up to the car, which had just pulled into the driveway, and politely asked, "Can I help you?" The driver, a middle-aged woman with a stern expression, rolled down her window and said, "Oh, we've been using this road for years. It's a shortcut to the main street." Emma was taken aback. "This is private property," she replied firmly. "You can't just drive through here without permission." The woman shrugged. "It's always been used by the community. You're new here, so you wouldn't know." Emma felt a knot form in her stomach. She had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning. As the days went by, more and more cars began to use the Thompsons' driveway as a shortcut. Emma and Jake quickly realized that their property bordered a neighborhood governed by a homeowners association, HOA. The HOA, led by a woman named Margaret Hayes, had a long history of enforcing strict rules and regulations. Margaret, who was the vice president of the HOA, was known for her authoritarian demeanor and her belief that the community's needs always came first. Emma and Jake soon learned that their driveway had once been part of an old road that connected two parallel streets in the HOA neighborhood. Although the road hadn't been public since the 1950s, many residents still used it as a shortcut to avoid a longer, gravel road that led into their neighborhood. The Thompsons tried to reason with the drivers, putting up private property signs and politely asking them to stop using their driveway. But their requests were met with indifference, and in some cases, outright hostility. One morning, Emma stepped outside to find a large SUV stuck in their yard, its tires spinning and tearing up the grass they had painstakingly planted. The driver, a man in his 40s, didn't even apologize. "It's just grass," he said with a shrug before driving off. That was the breaking point for Emma and Jake. They had moved to Willow Creek for peace and privacy, not to deal with constant trespassing and disrespect. They decided to take action. The next day, they installed a sturdy gate at the entrance of their driveway, effectively blocking access to anyone who didn't have permission to enter. They also added more "no trespassing" signs and security cameras to monitor any further incidents. For a while, it seemed to work. The cars stopped coming, and the Thompsons finally felt like they could breathe again. But their peace was short-lived. One evening, as Emma was folding baby clothes in the nursery, she heard the sound of relentless honking outside. Her heart skipped a beat as she glanced out the window and saw Margaret Hayes standing by the gate, her shiny black SUV idling behind her. Margaret's face was twisted with anger as she glared at the house. Emma's first instinct was to stay inside, but the honking didn't stop. It echoed through the quiet neighborhood, a deliberate, piercing sound that grated on her nerves. Taking a deep breath, Emma stepped outside. The cool evening air did little to calm her racing heart. She kept her distance, but spoke firmly. "Can I help you?" Margaret turned her glare on Emma. "Are you the one who put up this gate?" she barked. "You need to open it right now. I'm late." Emma's palms were clammy, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is private property," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. "The gate stays closed." Margaret's temper exploded. She took a step closer, pointing a manicured finger at Emma. "Do you know who I am? I'm the vice president of the HOA. This road has been used by our community for years. You have no right to block it off." Emma stood her ground. "This is my property. The road hasn't been public in over 70 years. It's private now, and we're within our rights to close it. Margaret's face turned crimson. You're just some pregnant little girl playing house, thinking you can tell us what to do. Well, guess what? The HOA isn't going to let you ruin this neighborhood. I'll make sure of it. Before Emma could respond, Margaret pulled out her phone and dialed 911. Yes, I need an officer at Willow Creek Lane immediately, she said, glaring at Emma. This woman is illegally blocking a public road and refusing to comply. Emma felt her knees wobble as she stared at Margaret. The audacity, the sheer cruelty, it was overwhelming. She was willing to lie to escalate the situation just to get her way. About 15 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up to the gate. The officer, a tall man with a calm demeanor, stepped out and approached Margaret, who was still ranting about community rights and public access. The officer listened patiently before turning to Emma. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked, his tone kind. Emma felt a lump rise in her throat. "I'm pregnant, and we bought this house to feel safe," she said, her voice trembling. "But now it feels like we're being attacked in our own home." The officer nodded understandingly. "Take a deep breath. You're doing the right thing by standing your ground. Can you explain what's going on here?" Emma took a deep breath and began to explain the situation, pulling out the property deed and paperwork she and Jake had prepared. The officer studied the documents carefully before turning to Margaret. "Ma'am, this road is private property," he said firmly. "They have every right to put up a gate and restrict access." Margaret's face turned crimson. "But we've been using this road for years. That has to count for something." The officer shook his head. "It doesn't matter how long the road was used. If it's private property, it's private property. Trespassing laws apply here, and you could be cited if you continue using this road without permission." Margaret looked like she was about to explode. "This is outrageous. I'm going to take this to the HOA. We'll see about this." The officer turned to Emma. "If she or anyone else continues to trespass, you can call us. For now, I'd recommend documenting any incidents and making sure your signage is visible." Emma thanked the officer, relief washing over her. But as Margaret stormed off, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The next day, Emma and Jake received a letter from the HOA demanding they remove the gate. The letter cited community convenience and accused them of disrupting the neighborhood's way of life. It was clear that Margaret was determined to make their lives difficult. Over the next few weeks, the harassment escalated. Noise complaints were filed every time they played music or had friends over. Someone trampled the flowers in their front yard, leaving muddy footprints behind. A neighbor even returned a borrowed ladder, muttering, "Sorry, but we can't be associated with all this." Emma felt the weight of 100 unseen eyes. Whispers followed her everywhere, and the driveway that once filled her with pride now felt like a target. One evening, after another restless night, Emma sat at the kitchen table with Jake. "What if we tell our story to the public?" she blurted out. Jake looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowing. "You mean like the news or social media?" "Why not?" Emma said, her voice steadier than she expected. "This isn't just about us anymore. Margaret's harassment, it's not right. People should know what's happening here." Jake hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Let's do it." They spent the next few days drafting a post, detailing their experience and the harassment they had endured. When they finally hit publish, the response was overwhelming. The post went viral, with thousands of people sharing their story and offering support. The fallout was swift. The HOA called an emergency meeting to address the situation. When Emma and Jake walked into the neighborhood clubhouse, they were met with a mix of hostility and curiosity. Margaret, sitting at the head of the table, looked furious. "This is about maintaining the traditions and cooperation that make this neighborhood a community," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Their actions are selfish, and tonight we will vote to require the removal of their gate." But as Emma and Jake presented their case, the tide began to turn. They laid out the legal documents, the property deed, and even the footage of cars trespassing on their driveway. The board members, who had initially seemed hostile, began to soften. One board member, a younger woman with a thoughtful expression, turned to Emma. "Honestly, I wouldn't have had the courage to stand up like you have. It's inspiring." Margaret's frustration boiled over. "This is personal," she shouted, her composure unraveling. "They're ruining everything." But the HOA president, Mr. Whitmore raised a hand, silencing the room. We've heard both sides, and it's clear that the homeowners at Willow Creek Lane are within their rights. Our role is to enforce rules fairly, not reinterpret them for convenience. Margaret looked like she might explode. You can't be serious, she hissed. But Mr. Whitmore ignored her. We adjourn tonight without a vote and consult with legal advisors. This matter must be resolved lawfully. The next few days were a blur. The neighborhood buzzed with speculation, and Margaret's grip on the community began to loosen. By the time the next emergency HOA meeting was called, the mood had shifted entirely. That evening, the clubhouse was packed. Margaret sat off to the side, her clipboard conspicuously absent. Mr. Whitmore stood at the front, his expression serious but resolute. After thorough review, he announced, we have confirmed that the homeowners at Willow Creek Lane are in full compliance. Their actions are within their legal rights, and the HOA has no authority to enforce changes on their property. A hush fell over the room, broken only by a few murmurs. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her face a mixture of anger and humiliation. Mr. Whitmore's next words sealed her fate. Furthermore, due to recent actions that have caused division and distress, Margaret has voluntarily stepped down as vice president of the HOA. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Margaret shot to her feet, her voice trembling with outrage. This is outrageous. I've only ever done what's best for this community. Mr. Whitmore met her glare evenly. Margaret, this board cannot condone behavior that oversteps boundaries and disregards the rights of homeowners. The decision is final. Margaret stormed out, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, leaving behind a stunned silence. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt a weight lift from her chest. Neighbors approached them as the meeting adjourned, offering apologies and support. You were right to stand your ground, one elderly woman said, her smile warm. Another neighbor, who had once sided with Margaret, looked sheepish. I'm sorry, he admitted. I see now she was out of line. That evening, as Emma and Jake sat on the porch watching the sunset, she felt something she hadn't felt in weeks: peace. We did it, she said softly, leaning against him. We did, Jake agreed, his arm around her. And no one's taking this away from us. The storm was over, and they had won. The peace that Emma and Jake had fought so hard to achieve was short-lived. Just as they were settling into their new routine as expectant parents, a new threat emerged. This time, it wasn't the HOA or Margaret Hayes. It was something far more insidious. One morning, as Emma was sipping her coffee on the porch, she noticed a strange car parked at the edge of their property. The driver, a man in his late 30s with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes, was taking pictures of their house. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She quickly went inside and called Jake. There's a man outside taking pictures of our house, she said, her voice trembling. Jake, who was working from home, immediately went to the window. I'll handle this, he said, grabbing his phone and heading outside. The man didn't seem fazed by Jake's approach. Can I help you? Jake asked, his tone firm but polite. The man looked up from his camera and smirked. Just admiring the property, he said. Heard there was some drama here. Thought I'd check it out. Jake's jaw tightened. This is private property. You need to leave. The man shrugged. No need to get hostile. I'm just doing my job. And what job is that? Jake asked, his patience wearing thin. The man didn't answer. Instead, he got back into his car and drove off, leaving Jake with a sinking feeling in his stomach. Over the next few days, more strange incidents occurred. A drone was spotted flying over their property, and they received several anonymous phone calls that hung up as soon as they answered. Emma and Jake began to feel like they were being watched. They decided to install additional security cameras and motion sensors around their property. They also reached out to their lawyer, who advised them to document everything and report any suspicious activity to the police. One evening, as they were reviewing the footage from their security cameras, they noticed something unusual. The same car that had been parked at the edge of their property was seen driving by their house multiple times over the past week. The driver seemed to be casing their property. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. What if this is connected to Margaret, she asked. Jake frowned. I don't know, but we need to find out who this guy is and what he wants. Their suspicions were confirmed when they received a letter from a local real estate developer, Martin Grayson. The letter stated that Grayson was interested in purchasing their property for a substantial sum and urged them to consider his offer. Emma and Jake were stunned. They had no intention of selling their home, especially not to someone who had been spying on them. They decided to do some digging and discovered that Martin Grayson had a reputation for using underhanded tactics to acquire properties. He had been involved in several lawsuits with homeowners who had refused to sell, and there were rumors that he had ties to organized crime. But the most shocking revelation was that Margaret Hayes was working with Grayson. She had been feeding him information about their property and encouraging him to pressure them into selling. Armed with this information, Emma and Jake decided to confront Margaret. They arranged a meeting at the local coffee shop, hoping to catch her off guard. Margaret arrived, looking as smug as ever. "What's this about?" she asked, sitting down across from them. Emma didn't mince words. "We know you're working with Martin Grayson. We know you've been feeding him information about our property." Margaret's face turned pale, but she quickly recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice shaking. Jake leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Cut the act, Margaret. We have proof. And if you don't back off, we'll take it to the police." Margaret's composure cracked. "You don't understand," she said, her voice desperate. "Grayson promised me a cut of the deal. I needed the money. I'm in debt, and I didn't know what else to do." Emma felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by anger. "You were willing to sell us out for money? After everything we've been through?" Margaret looked down, unable to meet their eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Emma and Jake knew they had to act fast. They reached out to their lawyer, who advised them to file a restraining order against Grayson and Margaret. They also decided to go public with their story, hoping to expose Grayson's shady tactics and put an end to his harassment. The response was overwhelming. The local news picked up the story, and soon, Grayson's name was all over the media. Homeowners who had been pressured into selling came forward with their own stories, and the public outcry was deafening. Grayson tried to fight back, but the evidence against him was too strong. He was eventually arrested on charges of harassment, intimidation, and fraud. Margaret, realizing the gravity of her actions, cooperated with the authorities and testified against Grayson. With Grayson behind bars and Margaret out of the picture, Emma and Jake finally felt like they could breathe again. Their property was once again a sanctuary, and they were able to focus on preparing for the arrival of their baby. The community, which had once been divided, came together to support them. Neighbors who had once sided with Margaret apologized and offered their help. The HOA, under new leadership, implemented stricter rules to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. As Emma and Jake sat on their porch one evening, watching the sunset, they felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had come out stronger on the other side. "We did it," Emma said, leaning against Jake. "We did," Jake agreed, his arm around her. "And no one's taking this away from us." The storm was over, and they had won. But more importantly, they had learned the value of standing up for what was right and protecting what was theirs. Months later, Emma gave birth to a healthy baby girl, whom they named Lily. As they held their daughter in their arms, they knew that all the struggles they had faced were worth it. They had created a safe and loving home for their family, and nothing could take that away from them. The community of Willow Creek, once divided, had come together to support them. The HOA, under new leadership, implemented stricter rules to prevent similar incidents from happening in the future. As Emma and Jake sat on their porch one evening, watching the sunset, they felt a sense of peace and accomplishment. They had faced unimaginable challenges, but they had come out stronger on the other side. "We did it," Emma said, leaning against Jake. "We did," Jake agreed, his arm around her. "And no one's taking this away from us." The storm was over, and they had won. But more importantly, they had learned the value of standing up for what was right and protecting what was theirs. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story on Store of Good Stories. If this story touched your heart or made you think, don't forget to hit like and share the video to spread this positive message to more people. And if this is your first time here, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss any of the meaningful stories we share every week. Your support is the biggest motivation for Store of Good Stories to keep bringing heartfelt and valuable stories to you. See you in the next video.